On this channel, we have discussed over the years Man of Steel at great lengths. It's a movie I have a lot of time for as a Superman fan. I understand its strengths, its weaknesses, its successes, and its fails. Every movie ever made has its strengths and weaknesses. You're always hear the term from modern day people on social media, it's not the perfect movie. There is no perfect movie. There may be a movie that you beloved, and you think is perfect, but anything made by human hands, anything molded by human hands, has flaws, strengths, and weaknesses. It's a film that divided audiences, that united audiences, people hate, love. Man of Steel did something utterly brave, and it made a modern day contemporary Superman tale. Christopher Nolan, David Goyer, and Zack Snyder were right not to copy Superman 78, but to do their own thing. This is the only way you can do it. And yes, it was a very, very controversial, different movie. You've got Superman, Clark Kent, before he's Superman, traveling the world looking for answers on his origins. He's walking around with a beard. He doesn't look like Clark Kent, not any Clark Kent we've seen before. But it's a very interesting, unique take. You've got that moment where the guy is harassing the barmaid in the bar. And then once Clark defends her, the guy's bullying him and pushing him and pouring beer all over him. And then you get that great example of Clark Kent's restraint. You also get that in the flashback to his younger days when Whitney Fordham is bullying him as well and he's holding on to the bar. Man of Steel is a great movie. And as I say, it's very different. Now, I noticed how different it was going to be from when they send the baby Kal-El to Earth, and we don't see any Smallville sequences straight away. They deal with those sequences in flashbacks, and they're very different to the kind of scenes we got in Superman 78. Kind of. There's some similarity to what we saw in the Smallville TV show, because Zack Snyder and his kids watched Smallville and loved Smallville. Yeah, apparently Zack Snyder hates Superman and isn't a Superman fan, but he sat there for a decade with his children watching Smallville. Only a Superman fan, a Superman aficionado and lover would be doing that. So that's nonsense that Zack doesn't understand and doesn't like Superman. Yes, maybe he does prefer Batman. That's fine. I don't care about that. But these gun stands have been going around trying to tarnish the reputation of Man of Steel. Why? Because they're nervous. I don't blame them. Nobody knows how this film is going to be received. Now, the trailer was received very well. And normally a trailer with these type of historical views makes at least $1 billion if the views are accurate. If something, yes, let's say something dishonest isn't going on with those view counts. We'll have to wait and see to this movie. But the trailer, I liked the trailer, but that's no evidence of success. But Man of Steel did its own thing and in a lot of ways got punished for being original. Isn't that interesting, everyone? In an era where people keep on complaining about the lack of originality. If you watch Nerdrotic or Geeks and Gamers, they'll constantly complain that there's too many reboots and relaunches and a lack of originality, like we're all complaining. But then when Joker 2 has an original take, when the Snyderverse has an original take, they call it trash. Well, then you don't want original takes, right? And maybe it's also a thing where people are saying we don't want these kind of retellings of these myths. Tell new stories. I agree. Hollywood has become utterly, utterly lazy. The reason they're doing the DCU, the reason they did the DCEU is because they're very lazy and they don't want to come up with anything new. And the Marvel Cinematic Universe was making a lot of money. This industry has become totally about making money, and they're so obsessed with making money, they don't know how to make money anymore. That's by telling great stories. But they're not interested in doing that anymore. So it is interesting, isn't it? All these people who want originality, well, Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman is very original. If you want to ask me, excuse me, if you want to ask me what went wrong with the DCEU, it's the moment that they decided to bin David S. Goyer as the writer of the Man of Steel sequel. We went from a proper Man of Steel 2 to Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. I love BVS, I do. It's a great movie. It absolutely is. But absolutely the wrong movie to continue a franchise if you want people to come in. If you want to create a successful franchise, Batman vs. Superman isn't the way to go. But again, let me reiterate to the people hard of hearing at the back, I love Batman vs. Superman. They should have stuck with David Goyer and Christopher Nolan's vision, with Zack Snyder merely the director. But Zack Snyder Unleashed is a very, very dangerous animal. Now, personally, I enjoy Zack Snyder Unleashed, but it's not necessarily a good business move to have Zack Snyder unleashed, the guy who's coming up with the story as well as directing the movie. When he directed Man of Steel, he's a director. He's a visionary visual director. And when he's working for other people, it works better. Now, most of the films that Zack's made, he's properly got all-round control. But on Man of Steel, he didn't have total control. He had overall control of the movie visually. But Nolan and Goyer were in charge of the film's narrative. And that's why I believe Man of Steel was the perfect storm. It was original, it was contemporary. I mean, what happened to the Codex? All these millions of Kryptonian hosts inside of Kal-El, right? That would have been very interesting to see the Codex extracted from Kal. And what do you do with all these Kryptonians? They can't stay on Earth, there's too many of them. He has to find a planet for them. What a great sequel that would have been. Well, Zack Snyder didn't continue the story of the Codex because it wasn't his preferred story. It wasn't his idea. That was from Nolan and Goyer. But they removed Goyer, which meant Nolan wasn't going to, hang around. He was merely an executive producer of BVS with his wife Emma Thomas. Because Goyer was the one who had the idea of a First Contact Superman story. A really, really good idea. The Codex was his idea, but they didn't continue that story. So Man of Steel is the perfect storm because it's original. I'm not sure how original James Gunn's Superman is going to be. And whether you like Man of Steel or despise Man of Steel, you can't take away how beautifully it looks visually and how it's an original story. And it's very post for me in 9/11. If 9/11 if the people responsible for 9/11 were aliens instead of the people who were responsible for it, I think you'd get Man of Steel. But yeah, visually brilliant. The storytelling's very, very interesting. It's very, very Ridley Scott, isn't it? It's very Denis Villeneuve-like, Man of Steel. I think if Denis Villeneuve and Ridley Scott were directing a Superman movie, Man of Steel is kind of what you would get. And it's very, very epic. It's the way a superhero movie should be. But a lot of people were bleating and crying because they wanted a rehash of Superman 78. The first movie I ever saw, the reason I fell in love with DC and Superman, the reason I fell in love with telling stories and loving stories because of Superman 78. I'm not here to crap over Superman 78, but that was in 1978. Bryan Singer's Superman Returns proved what a bad idea it is to take a 1978 movie and put that kind of pacing into a 2006 movie in Superman Returns. Superman Returns is a film of good moments, great moments, but it's not a great movie, and that is one of many reasons why that movie doesn't work. But yet again, they're obsessed with Christopher Reeve. The best Superman as far as I'm concerned. Let's not get it twisted. But you have to move with the times. You have to make something contemporary. And Man of Steel may have only made 650 million or 670 million or whatever it is. There was still a slight profit in that. And all WB had to do was go with Goyas and Nolan's vision. It would have got better and better. I'm sure they would have told, they would have done a Superman trilogy as they did, a Man of Steel trilogy as they did a Dark Knight trilogy, right? And I don't know what would have happened after that. And I've said on previous videos, or at least one previous video, that the DCEU shouldn't have been a thing. A Man of Steel trilogy should have been the first step, and then take it from there. But they were seeing what Disney and Marvel Studios were doing. They were making crap loads of money, and WB wanted some of that. Their greed led them. They wanted to make money, but what they did was so reactive and so wrong. And they have divided the DC fandom. And they continue to divide the DC fandom. And lying about Henry Cavill returning as Superman was the rod that broke the camel's back. There is no trust within this studio now. The consumer does not trust them. A lot of the consumer doesn't trust James Gunn. We've discussed Gunn on this platform many, many times. I like him. He's capable. He's talented. And we'll see what type of Superman movie and DCU he's going to give us. I like the idea of adapting Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, a great graphic novel. I like the idea of Sergeant Rock starring Daniel Craig. That's something I'm very, very excited about. And the director of the movie Queer, that starred Daniel Craig, a former James Bond, a great James Bond. So that's exciting. But first of all, Superman has to be successful. Even Gunn's admitted this himself. But all this divide between Gunn fans and Snyder fans, to me, I don't want to get involved with that. But I want to be clear how I feel about Man of Steel. Man of Steel's originality and contemporary nature is its greatest strength. The fact that it doesn't just try and be another Superman 78. That's what I've said it millions of times on here before as well. That's why I respect Superman and Lois. It tried to do something fresh and new. That's why I love Smallville. It was a fresh take on the same material. Smallville took Superman out of the costume and decided to tell his origin story for a decade. And mostly, they did it so well. I think we all know where we was the day Christopher Reeve was introduced in the episode Rosetta as Dr. Virgil Swan. I'm rewatching Smallville again. I rewatched that episode yesterday, and I tell you, boys and girls, I was in floods of tears. And if you don't find Christopher Reeve passing the torch to our brand new Superman at the time, Tom Welling, emotional and enough reason for a grown man to cry, then watch the scene in the storm cellar between Snyder and Welling, between Pa Kent and Clark Kent. It's amazing. That guy felt like my dad when I was watching Smallville. Sometimes, by mistake, I call him Dad when I'm watching it. When he says something so strong and compelling to Clark, giving him great advice. You're a force for good, Clark Kent. You know, just because your biological father says you're good at concrete doesn't mean you have to do that. And then he hugs him, but then you see the quick squint of doubt in Snyder's face, in Pa Kent's face. Brilliant. Great original ways of doing Superman. Fresh ways of doing Superman is the only way to go. Maybe a Superman movie, maybe it's not possible for a Superman movie to bring in $1 billion or $2 billion. Maybe the best it can do is 650 to 700 million. Maybe that's what Gunn's movie is going to do. Maybe Gunn's movie will make less. Maybe Gunn's movie will make less or more. But my point is, maybe Superman will never have the popularity, bringing enough of the audience to make the money that the studio and us fans want it to make. And maybe that's just the reality of the situation.